Dear guests, my name is Förster. I'm the founding director of the Center for African Studies here, and I stepped down from that position a couple of years ago. And today, as a sort of reward, I have been invited to give the welcome address here. So dear colleagues and friends from all over Africa, from Europe and from all over the world, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 7th European Conference on African Studies in Basel in Switzerland. Since the foundation of the Center for African Studies Basel, 50 years were to pass before we are finally meeting here in Basel on the Rhine to discuss the state of African studies, new emerging themes of research, and their relevance for Africa as well as Europe and the global North more generally. And 12 years have passed since the first European Conference on African Studies in 2005 in London. And I know that the organizer is here. Since then, ECAS has grown and is today, together with the annual meeting of the African Studies Association US and on the African continent, the conference of the Council for the Development of Social Science Research in Africa, our partner Codesria, one of the biggest gatherings of its kind worldwide. For many, the sheer size of such events is daunting. And for others, Basel is not an obvious choice to hold such a conference. It is much smaller than London, Lisbon, and Paris, where ECAS had been held before. The center is also much younger than most other centers in the AEGIS network, and Switzerland is known for its high living expenses and expensive hotel rooms. So please allow me to say a few words about why we decided to host this conference for AEGIS, the Africa-Europe Group of Interdisciplinary Studies. Basel has always been a nodal point. Already when the Romans captured the town from the Celts, it was a place where goods were traded across the river into faraway countries. The people also exchanged ideas about almost everything, from religion to philosophy, geography, history, languages, and the wider horizons of what we would call today the global economy. If the city is, as we argue here, an interplay of encounter and distanciation, then this event is certainly about the former, the encounter across boundaries. In times when some governments believe that it is better to seal their countries off international exchange and the free movement of people, it is, we believe, necessary to show that ideas are always linked to people. Ideas do not exist in splendid isolation. They call for a continuous exchange between people who think about them, discuss them, and eventually agree or disagree on them. We are particularly proud to have raised substantial funds to bring African colleagues and students to Basel, and we very much hope that you will enjoy your stay here with us, that you will have stimulating discussions with colleagues and friends from Africa, Europe, and many other places, and that you make new friends. Being a foreigner myself, I may add that the city of Basel and its inhabitants received me more warm-heartedly than many a place in my own country. And I very much hope that you will experience Basel the very same way. As for me, Basel competed with a small town somewhere in the West African savannah, where the people made me a part of their daily life and finally awarded me the status of a relative. In January this year, I talked to a close friend, whom I knew since his childhood, about us having such a big conference. He looked at me, and being a simple peasant who can hardly read and write, he asked me directly, "What is that good for? Is it about generating travel expenses?" He interrupted himself and then added, "What good does it do to us, to the peasants in West Africa?" Well, simple questions sometimes make us aware of larger problems. This was a moment when my friend, as a peasant, articulated much more than just aloofness toward the curious habits of a privileged group of people that can afford to travel to such a greener pasture or paradise on earth. Indeed, there has been more to such a conference than the exchange of ideas, though that is, without doubt, an important reason to bring so many people together. It is up to us all to answer my friend's question. It's not only up to me. We as scholars and as intellectuals have an obligation to forward our knowledge to the people who are not here and who may not even know that this conference takes place. We must not only talk with colleagues and students, we need to go beyond the usual frontiers of the academy. And the exchange also needs a framework that sustains it. I think of two things besides the free movement of people that is threatened in many a country today, not least in the global north. The free movement of ideas, which we might take as a counterpart to the former, requires free media and free journalism, and not intellectuals who are threatened and eventually imprisoned without being indicted. I've been asked to mention quite a number of scholars, intellectuals, artists, and activists, more generally, who are currently held in custody. Sadly, it would be a long list, and I could add many more names. I feel ashamed that I cannot do much more than stating here that we all have to defend the rights of those who suffer from such repression. What we can hopefully take home from this conference is that we all contradict alternative facts, wherever they appear, be it in Africa, in the United States, or in some European countries. And there are possibilities to do so. Let me mention only one, coming to my second point. We are all aware that an ideal space where people can freely express their ideas and exchange on how they will want to live, which is a core definition of politics, does not exist, neither here nor anywhere else. But that must not serve as an excuse not to aim at creating a space where such a culture of mutual learning, studying, and researching can emerge. A university is not an institution of vocational training in some discipline or in more than one discipline. A university is not a consultancy that the administration can make use of, prescribing themes and topics that serve development, which has often become a sort of empty signifier that can legitimize all sorts of interventions in social life. I am convinced that it is absolutely necessary to understand that the academy is a social space where the state and future of a polity needs to be discussed. No society can do without it, and reducing the university to some sort of annex to a ministry is as wrong as trying to control the free expression of ideas of those who engage in such debates. But, and that is a strong but, we scholars also have to contribute to this exchange, namely by taking it beyond the limits of the milieu so that we are all familiar with. We need to talk to simple people as often as we do among ourselves. And we need to adapt our language to theirs. Perhaps pidgin instead of proper English. Nushi instead of French. And perhaps Hausa or Swahili instead of any European language. We should speak in different tongues and meet them where they are, maybe in a narrow backyard or in a remote village, far away from the lecture halls and air-conditioned offices that we all are familiar with. I may be old-fashioned, but I do hope that this conference has such after effects. It would mean that those who cannot be here, in particular the many urban as well as rural Africans who are not part of the academy, will also benefit from this conference. And I could tell my friend that this conference, what this was about. In that sense, I would like to invite you to rethink the relationship between our centers and African studies centers elsewhere. I mean, the Europeans and others. And there is actually a long debate going on at the core of AEGIS. I wish you 3 fruitful days full of the most stimulant encounters that this city and we all have to offer. You're welcome. Thank you very much.
So, ladies and gentlemen, dear Professor Clara Carvalho, President of AEGIS and dear board member of AEGIS, dear representatives of African Studies Centers, learned societies and scientific organizations worldwide, dear Anne Major and Daniel Künstler, co-president of the Swiss Society for African Studies, where are they? Not here, not arrived yet. Oh, sorry. Okay, dear representatives of funding bodies and partners of ECAS2017, dear participants, and especially dear colleagues from institutions from the African continent. It is a great honor and a pleasure to welcome you today at the University of Basel, and I saw many people giving each other a hug, so I think it's a conference full of friends. The African Studies, and I also welcome, of course, the cooperation, as well the cooperations with outstanding academic institutions, researchers and students from all over the African continent, and they have been, you know, African Studies university strategy for several years. We are thus grateful to have the opportunity to host the European Conference on African Studies, one of the world's main academic events focusing on this fascinating area. Every 2 years, the ECAS brings together hundreds of scholars from both Europe and Africa and from far beyond our 2 continents. We are very happy that you have all joined us today here in Basel. The commitment of the University of Basel to African Studies is based on a long-standing tradition of exchange with Africa through institutions such as the Basel Mission or the Swiss Tropical and Public Health Institute, known as Swiss TPH, which is affiliated to our university. For instance, the Swiss TPH introduced a first preparatory training for tropical countries after World War II. This path-breaking initiative can be seen as the precursor of the interdisciplinary master's and PhD programs in African Studies the university offers today. Over the years, several other departments and disciplines at the university, as well as many of our students, have devoted special attention to the African continent. The broad interest for this multidisciplinary area has led to the establishment of a chair for African history and a chair for African studies. It culminated, as you have heard from my colleague Till Förster, in the creation of the Center of African Studies. The center is a coordinated network building on resources in various disciplines and institutions spread all over the university and the town of Basel, such as the Basel Africa bibliographies, the Basel Mission, the Museum of Cultures, or, as I already mentioned, the Swiss TPH. It has proved extremely valuable and helpful to sustain and further develop cooperation with Africa. Finally, in 2008, thanks to its many activities focusing on the African continent, the University of Basel was chosen by the federal government of Switzerland as leading house for the development of academic cooperation between the Republic of South Africa and the Swiss Confederation. To sum up, the University of Basel and its regional partner institution have undoubtedly established themselves as the African hub on the Swiss academic landscape. In this context, one should not forget that Basel is also an international renowned center for life science and medical research, being home to 2 of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies. The strong emphasis on the social sciences and the humanities in Basel African Studies, coupled with our university's focus on life sciences, offers new perspective and unique opportunities for interdisciplinary research. The university's commitment to African studies shows its commitment to global issues. Africa is one of the most important continents for our university, and it's a part of our strategy. It's fascinating, it's rich of culture, rich of history, rich of diversity, and we can learn a lot from each other. I'm really glad to have you all here and to have this conference here on this very important topic. Hosting this convention underlines the importance of this area, as I already said, and I'm convinced that the 7 ECAS will be a great success. And accurate planning is essential for such an important event, you know it, because, you know, we are at the limit of our capacities. We have so many participants. Of course, we are proud, but it was quite a lot of organization. So I would like to thank everybody involved for making this conference possible. I'm particularly grateful to the organizing team here in Basel, to Professor Till Förster, Professor Alicia Macau, and Dr. White Art for bringing this fascinating event to our university. And I would like to clap my hands for these 3 colleagues. Please stand up and give them a warm clapping. Great. Thank you very much. I meant that the 3 people should stand up to show you. But it's very nice and shows how much you really estimate them. A special thank goes, of course, to all our partner institutions of the event, to AEGIS and to the Swiss Society for African Studies in the first place, and all individuals involved in this organization. And finally, I would like to sincerely thank all the participants of the ECAS. With your precious contributions, you have provided and you will provide the very substance that constitutes the real value of this fascinating event. I wish you all a very successful conference, a lot of friends, with many stimulating discussions and valuable insight. And to all of our guests, I wish a rewarding time at our university and a very pleasant stay in our very nice small town, Basel. Thank you very much.
Bonjour à tous. Je suis donc Anne Mayor, coprésidente de la Société suisse d'études africaines. La coprésidence n'est pas un mode de fonctionnement très commun et c'est pour ça que vous avez entendu parler dans la présentation précédente de Daniel Künzler, qui est justement mon coprésident. Ainsi, au nom de la Société suisse d'études africaines, qui est partenaire donc de l'organisation de cette 7e ECAS, particulièrement riche en participants, je vous souhaite à tous la bienvenue en Suisse, à Bâle. Merci donc à tous ceux qui se sont déplacés, parfois de très loin, d'être venus enrichir cet événement de leur présence, de leur expérience, de leur amitié, comme cela vient d'être dit. Je me permets de faire ce mot de bienvenue en français, car la Suisse est un pays qui pratique le plurilinguisme, de même que la plupart des pays africains. Et donc, je rappelle au passage que le français est une langue officielle de la conférence qui peut, n'hésitez pas à l'utiliser, en tout cas. Il y a peu de sessions en français, mais... Voilà, nous sommes donc très heureux d'accueillir une conférence d'une telle importance en Suisse. Ceci témoigne du développement ou reflète aussi le développement très important qu'ont connu les études africaines en Suisse. Celles-ci se sont particulièrement développées à l'université de Bâle, comme cela a été dit, depuis une bonne quinzaine d'années, avec la mise en place d'un cursus d'études africaines, de master, de doctorat. Et c'est intéressant de voir aujourd'hui que ce développement se poursuit ailleurs en Suisse. Et depuis l'an passé, nous avons également un master d'études africaines qui s'est mis en place à l'université de Genève, donc dans la partie francophone de la Suisse. Et nous travaillons en étroite collaboration. Des étudiants de Bâle sont venus à Genève et on espère qu'il y ait une bonne synergie entre ces différents centres de dynamisme des études africaines en Suisse. La Société suisse d'études africaines joue un rôle particulier justement dans la coordination et la mise en lien de ces centres et des non-centres aussi, je pourrais dire, de tous les autres endroits où également se développent des activités liées à l'Afrique, en Suisse, à l'international et bien sûr avec l'Afrique. Donc, je ne veux pas rallonger plus que ça. J'aimerais juste aujourd'hui vous dire que nous sommes très heureux d'être là en tant que co-organisateurs de cet événement majeur des études africaines. Et donc, je vous souhaite de très fructueux échanges, de très belles journées de conférences. Et nous nous réjouissons des suites de cette conférence qui seront certainement très riches. Les échanges qui s'opèrent dans le cadre de ce genre de conférences donnent toujours lieu à des projets, à d'autres choses, et c'est ça le but. Nous vous remercions d'être là et très belle conférence à tous. Alors.
So, good morning, everyone. My name is Clara Carvalho, and I'm here to speak in the name of the AEGIS-board. First of all, I would like to remember that we have 3 official languages at AEGIS, so we are a little bit like the Swiss Confederation. So, bonjour à tous e bom dia a todos. But I'll switch to English just to help everyone understanding it. I would like to start by presenting the AEGIS network, presented, of course, at this huge and large and wonderful conference that is about to begin. AEGIS is the network of the African Studies Centers based in Europe, but not only in Europe, it's now spreading all over in Africa and Asia, and we are looking forward to other continents, like in Southern America, already have Brazil popping up, and in Australia. It counts nowadays with 29 members. We have just welcomed Leeds University as a full membership, 5 associated members from all over Europe, and also a total of 4 affiliated members for this moment. Looking at this large network that organizes conferences like this one, but also thematic conferences that are much smaller and much more dedicated to a single thematic, that organizes collaborative research groups, summer schools, and that engages in multiple collaborations on common projects, publications, teaching, and funding quests, or fundraising, we recognize over their difference a common pattern. And this common pattern is the capacity to work, to conduct research, to read and publish, to teach and learn, crossing disciplinary boundaries and academic and continental or even north-south boundaries. For overpassing these barriers, we have 3 instruments. We have, first of all, networking. That's what we are good at doing, as to say. And we do it from a more individual level to the building up of the institutional ties. At this level, let me remember one of the most creative groups from AEGIS, the collaborative research groups, that welcome scholars from both AEGIS and non-AEGIS centers, from both Europe and other continents. So I would invite everyone who is present at this room, be it from an AEGIS center or from another part of the world, another center, another university, just to look at our site and to look at our collaborative research groups and try to find out if you fit in, because we are welcoming everyone to come. These collaborative research groups are also very fertile, seed-based for creating new research networks, for creating new projects, for engaging in new publications. Then we have collaborative teaching. Of course, we have it within Europe, and we are leading a very successful summer school that engages several AEGIS centers. But we are looking forward at this particular subject. We are looking for a further and larger collaboration between North and South institutions, and particularly between European and African institutions. It is a long way, but as an association, we will be trying to advocate for it. And then let me spend a little bit more about my third point. That's open science. I would like to quote Mijan de Bruin in her most motivating keynote address that she just delivered yesterday, and where she pointed out the effect of the digitalization of knowledge that we'll have on African studies behind having it already on political terms, as we know, on families, communities, and so on. She ended her speech with a wish. Why not spread digital libraries? So I'm glad to let you know that at AEGIS we are working at that, and from today we'll have the series that you publish with Brill available online. This is a major step in a direction we'll all believe on, sharing knowledge, making it available to everyone who wants to profit from it. It is a new tool for those who want to engage in the cooperative work. And it is the beginning of a larger movement of creating common opportunities for knowledge sharing. So I do invite you to visit our website and have a look at this fantastic collection that has been spreading since 2005. Respecting a ban of 2 years, we'll find there 15 books online out of the 18 from the collection. And the last book you'll find is the one from the Paris conference just 2 years ago. It is a collection that spans through some of the most innovative research that has been conducted within AEGIS umbrella, and that goes from violence to migration, child fostering, mobilizations, or road safety. So it's rather large as in terms of thematics that are aborted. And I would like to thank, in particular, the work of two people that I hope are present here. One is Jod Elik from Brill, and the other is Jos Damen. I don't know if he's here, who was also the one who really invested in having this collection online. And so, last but not the least, I would like to thank the Basel Center for African Studies and the Swiss Society for African Studies for their extraordinary organization in these 7 ECAS. They choose a most pertinent thematic dedicated to the future of cities. Already in 1987, Ulf Hanners was driving our attention to the world industrialization, this mix-max of people, cultures, language, ways of life that spans in cities, and particularly in the fast-growing African towns. For the next days, we'll share our ideas and visions in this new, spanning Creole's world, in a conference that has everything to be also a Creole space. With its different inputs, its multi-participant, and its vibrant jazz staging, thanks to Vite. So for that, I would like to end by asking you, by joining me, congratulating and thanking the 3 men that are behind this organization. Till Förster, Elise McCam, who delivered a ton of speeches till now, and Vite. Thank you so much.
Don't worry, I'm not here for another welcome address. I'm just here to remind you of a few technical things. First of all, as I said, there's audiovisual transmission of the keynotes. Unfortunately, we cannot let in more people than are in at present. So, first floor, the last rooms have a transmission. Unfortunately, I witnessed many people buying coffee during the breaks. This is really unnecessary. If you have your badge, you're entitled to coffee from the coffee stalls. There are 3 stalls on the first floor, central, left and right, and then 2 stalls in the big tent outside. The big tent outside is also where you will have your lunch, if you have this bluish icon here on the right on your badge. This is your ID for the lunch. If you would like to access the tent and have lunch here, you can pass by the conference office and get a voucher at the price of 15 francs per meal. We also have got a few people coming in handing back the dinner vouchers, the banquet tickets. So if you like to join the banquet, you can always come by the office and put down your name to be informed if there's a free ticket available that you can take over. And I think that's already all I would like to say here. Also, on my behalf, all the best for ECAS. Thank you for bearing with a few technical glitches. I think each conference needs those. Else there's nothing to tell you stories about at the next conference. There were many things we wanted to improve on previous ECASs. We had this wish to do a conference app, for instance, and that went down the drain with many other things. The integration of the conference interface with the payment system was a nightmare. I mean, it was more of a disintegration resulting in a huge workload, which was all on the shoulders of my colleague Julia Büchele, who did a wonderful job in handling that. If you are still waiting for an invoice or a receipt, please bear with us and just keep insisting on it. We will get back to you with time. Okay, that's all. I would like to welcome on stage Alcinda Mawana to introduce our first keynote speakers and Lagarde Lecturer.
Good morning. On behalf of the International African Institute, I would like to welcome you all to this year's Lagarde Lecture. The Institute established the lecture in 1948 in honor of its founding chairman, Lord Lagarde. A few years ago, the Council had a lively debate on whether to change the name of the lecture because of Lord Lagarde's colonial ties. While there were divergent views, the Council came to the conclusion that it was important not to try and erase our ancestors or our history, but to acknowledge the past, face its dark side, and engage it critically to advance new perspectives, new ways of understanding ourselves and the world around us. And indeed, over the years, distinguished scholars developing innovative and cutting-edge research and analysis in the field of African studies have delivered remarkable Lagarde lectures on a variety of topics addressing critical challenges of our time. And it is with great pleasure that I introduce you today to my fellow countryman, Elísio Macamo, as the 2017 Lagarde Lecture. Elísio, meu irmão, é de facto grande orgulho para mim apresentar-te como o Lagarde Lecturer deste ano. Born in the city of Xai-Xai, we have a translation glitch, but this is a Mozambican. Born in the city of Xai-Xai in southern Mozambique, Professor Makamo studied in Maputo, where he concluded a diploma in language and translation, and then proceeded to earning a master's degree in translation and interpreting from Salford University in the UK, and another master's in sociology and social policy from the University of North London. He then continued his graduate studies in Germany, receiving a PhD and a habilitation in sociology from the University of Beirut in 1997 and 2009, respectively. Professor Makamo's distinguished scholarship made him rise through the ranks and is currently Director of African Studies Center and Head of the Department of Social Sciences in the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences at the University of Basel. Before joining the University of Basel, he taught development sociology in Beirut and was one of the founding members of the Beirut International Graduate School of African Studies. Moreover, Elísio Makamo has been a visiting professor at various universities in Germany, Portugal, Mozambique, South Africa, Brazil, and a member of several academic bodies, including the Council for Development of Social Science Research in Africa, CODESRE, the German and the Swiss Associations for African Studies, as well as the International African Institute. He is also co-editor of the African Sociological Review, the Brill Series on African Studies, the Revista Angolana de Sociologia, amongst many others. Elísio's outstanding contributions to academia are seen in his extensive publications. Drawing inspiration from both post-colonial theorists and sociological classics, he takes a special interest in the phenomenological and interpretative approaches to empirical social research, and has written on issues as diverse as modernity, religion, development policy, risk, disasters, social movements, political violence, as well as African philosophy. Elísio is committed to the development of African studies by addressing the challenges posed by cross-cultural and cross-disciplinary research. And as he pointed out in a recent interview, and I quote, "My main concern is to find ways to reflect about how to produce knowledge. It is a philosophical and epistemological concern because it is really about theories of knowledge," end of quote. Indeed, in his lecture today, entitled Urban Scholarship, Elísio eloquently addresses the challenges of studying Africa and understanding our contemporary world. How to navigate different currents of universalism and relativism. How to critique and transform Western epistemological concepts and theories. How to establish more inclusive basis for intercultural dialogue in conditions of diversity. These are some of the critical questions he will tackle in this excellent presentation. So, without further ado, I leave you with my friend, Professor Elísio Makamo. And I thank you very much.
So last evening it was me putting someone on the spot. Thank you, Alcinda. Dear friends, colleagues, dear participants, when I first learned that I had been chosen to deliver this lecture, I thought to myself how unusual it was for ECAS to have a local hero as keynote speaker. Fortunately, I'm arrogant enough, that's at least what people I don't like say about me, to assume that the International African Institute must have had very good reasons to chart new territory here. The problem, however, is that in the meantime, I have become a local villain for accepting the honor. The invitation to be the keynote speaker of a lecture named after Lord Lagarde has become something of a mixed blessing in the days of #mustfall. I have disappointed many younger and older colleagues, both here in Basel and elsewhere, by accepting to speak in honor of a man who stands for an objectionable period in African history and in the history of relations between Europe and Africa. I understand their disappointment, and I hope that some of what I would like to share with you today will help create a framework within which we can continue this most important conversation. I'm honored, I'm deeply honored to deliver this lecture. In fact, I have been relishing this moment from the word go. I've been wondering how sweet the words would sound that would introduce me. And I'm glad Alcinda didn't disappoint me. I've been wondering which aspects of my work would be brought to the attention of the audience. And most of all, which things that I wrote but never quite understood myself would finally be explained to me by whoever would introduce me. Now, I know that after learning that the chairwoman of the Institute, Alcinda Humana, is a fellow countrywoman of mine, some of the assembled Africanist expertise here will have jumped to conclusions. So let me reassure you, it's not what you're thinking. This is mere coincidence. But I do thank her for the kind introduction, and I bow myself before her own achievements as a scholar, who, now that we are at it, holds high the banner of Mozambican, of African, and of course also of female scholarship across the world. Alcinda's work on the youth in Africa has been a major influence on our own work here in Basel, on the career paths of young graduates in Mali and Burkina Faso. The Lagarde Lecture has in fact been a poisoned chalice right from the start. I remember that at the first ECAS in London back in 2005, I was asked by Patrick Chabal and Ulf Engels to comment on the first Lagarde Lecture. And I went there bent on causing trouble around the name and the person, just like my younger colleagues here in Basel are doing today. And so I dug out every filthy thing I could find about Lord Lagarde, like this one gem here about how he saw Africans, and I want to quote it. "The typical African," he wrote, "is a happy, thriftless, excitable person, lacking in self-control, discipline, and foresight, naturally courageous, courteous, and polite, full of personal vanity," that's me, with little of veracity, in brief, the virtues and defects of this race type are those of attractive children, end of quote. So I wanted to chastise Adebayo Olukoshi, the then executive secretary of CODESRIA, and a Nigerian, for accepting the invitation to speak under the banner of a man who held such views about his own people. But in the end, I decided not to say anything because, among other reasons, and to my greatest surprise, Adebayo Olukoshi was introduced by Valentin Mudimbe, the doyen of the African diaspora, if there ever was one, who happened to be the chairman of the Council of the International African Institute at the time. If even the man of letters, who so convincingly wrote about the invention of Africa and called upon us to challenge the colonial library, felt comfortable with the name, who was I to differ? In any case, I drew comfort from the realization that somehow my ability to control myself, to be disciplined and less excitable, was proving the great Englishman wrong. Today, with the benefit of hindsight, I also realized that there was foresight in the decision to shut up. For had I opened my mouth, I might never have been considered for a keynote lecture. And like I say, to be a keynote speaker for the IAI and at ECAS is an honor. Now, there are serious issues involved here, and these issues have to do not only with what it means to engage in knowledge production, they also have to do with our schizophrenia as African or Africanist scholars. When you suffer from schizophrenia, loneliness is not your major problem. But it takes a lot of mental strength to learn to manage the double life which is forced upon you by your commitment to a way of making sense of the world based on conceptual vocabularies that were brought to you by brilliant minds who despised your ancestors or who issued from an imperial culture for which abuse was the language of preference to deal with you, to deal with your culture, or to deal with the cultures that you're interested in. So what do you do under these circumstances? Do you withdraw into what Samir Amin once described as provincialism? That is, refusing to acknowledge the larger forces that may be responsible for the paradoxes of the world in which we live? Or do you find comfort in the realization that those who extol the virtues of universalism have not quite lived up to it either? Do you, to use Dipesh Chakrabarty's word, seek to provincialize Europe and celebrate with Aimé Césaire the people who invented nothing? Do you frown upon what Mudimbe called the smell of the father and soberly deplore the loss for good of Africa? Or do you hold on to an image of a past which may never have been there? Do you ask rhetorically with Spivak whether the subaltern can speak? Or should you, as I have suggested recently, ask the sovereign to shut up? Do you, with Chingwenzo, with Ngungi wa Thiong'o, with Kwasi Wiredu, call for the decolonization of the African mind? Or should you change the focus and call for the decolonization of the European mind? And when you follow suit on this call for the decolonization of minds, what kind of research program are you going to be standing up for? How are you going to vouch for its intellectual integrity without appearing contradictory? I mean, how do you rebel against something misrepresenting you when you know that your rebellion is intelligible to you and to others because you and those others know that your rebellion can only be articulated and rendered intelligible within the framework laid down by the conceptual language which misrepresents and oppresses you. It was Kwame Anthony Appiah who exposed the ridiculous side of this paradox when he described nativism in African literature as something akin to natives following the emperor's orders to get dressed, but insisting that the clothes should be made from homegrown cotton. Whether we like it or not, and in spite of claims to the contrary by those of us who see usefulness in working out Southern epistemologies, decolonial perspectives, or whatever we want to call them, there doesn't seem to be any way in which we could formulate our criticism of so-called Western epistemologies without falling prey to what philosophers describe as a self-referential paradox. Is a view from nowhere possible? How can I engage in Western bashing when I know that the intelligibility of what I'm doing is to be found in the thing itself, the thing that I reject? Can I describe myself as a sociologist or a social scientist for that matter, even though I have misgivings about the uses to which the discipline has been put in the past? How liberating a decolonial project can be, which is formulated from within the colonial project from which it wishes to escape. And if we can step aside, will we still have cause to rebel? Isn't silence the most decolonial act, the most radical form of resistance at all? Merely shutting up, not saying anything in order not to be trapped into using contaminated words and languages. But then again, to the extent that shutting up would be an option given to us by our oppressors, how much resistance could be read into that? I'm already past the first quarter of my time, and I realize with dismay that I have not yet said what I'm actually up to. I hope, however, that my last thoughts have given you a sense of the direction in which I'm moving. I'm concerned with scholarship in Africa, but also with scholarship about Africa. I'm particularly interested in reflecting on the job which we are doing when we claim to be doing African studies. The issue does not interest me because I need arguments to convince the University of Basel to continue paying for my position. I mean, that too. But I'm interested in the issue because the legitimate questions which we can ask about personalities like Lord Lagarde raise further questions about why we study Africa in the first place. We feel uncomfortable about people like Lord Lagarde because we associate him with a whole tradition in the study of non-European societies from which we are trying to break free. Now, I know that this audience will not be impressed to know about how proud I am to serve a university, the University of Basel, which once employed a great dead white male. He was alive then. By the name Nietzsche. But I appeal to my posthumous colleague to make my point. Incidentally, God is said to be saying with a contented smile, Nietzsche is dead. Now, our will to truth conceals our will to ignorance. In other words, if we want to have knowledge, or truth for that matter, we must seek the company of illusion and falsity. That is, we must make sense of things ourselves so that we can hold on to the truths which such creations present to us. It was in The Birth of Tragedy, the piece in which he defined art as that which makes life meaningful and tragedy as its highest form, making life tolerable, that Nietzsche suggested to us that surviving chaos and politically incorrectly named keynote lectures implies constructing a meaningful world. There's a sense in which engaging in scholarship when you are not European, or to be more inclusive, when you are interested in non-European subjects, is an exercise in coming to grips with cynicism. Reading about the Enlightenment and all the values it expounded is in some ways highly challenging, because it makes you wonder why a culture which extols universal values insists that the path to truth, if ever there was one, must follow signposts written in one conceptual language, informed by very local values. It makes you wonder why intelligibility is a function of our ability to make sense of other realities using one particular experience of the world. And it makes you wonder why studying Africa must necessarily mean applying theoretical and conceptual resources developed in the so-called minority part of the world, and not also availing oneself of our study of the African continent to help improve our ways of making sense of the world, including making sense of Europe. So if you don't want to be cynical, you must be like the type of philosopher celebrated by Nietzsche, the free spirit, the kind of philosopher who is aware that doing scholarship is like walking at the edge of an abyss, knowing full well that the ground upon which one stands is shaky. So maybe by assuming that the ground upon which we stand is unstable and shifty, we are already being cynical. And yet, that is what enables us to find our bearings in the world. The fact that we are conscious of the lack of ground beneath us enables us to resist the temptation to think that our ideas and findings necessarily represent objective reality. All these out-of-the-way things which happen to us when we look at how the world played evil step farther with Africa, they help us search for possible worlds in all the things left unsaid by the conceptual apparatuses which we deploy to elicit meanings from reality. It was Kwasi Wiredu, the Ghanaian philosopher, who called upon us to have the courage to squeeze concepts until they can no longer tell us anything new or intelligible about the world we know, so that by becoming aware of the limits of our world, we can begin to understand. And the way we then rearrange the world on the basis of the meanings which the concepts can no longer yield would represent our will to power. And that's precisely what I would like to define as urbane scholarship. I use this notion in two related ways, but first let me say something about how I see its connection to urban studies. I see African urban settings as spaces made up of technological artifacts. In other words, the urban in Africa, as indeed elsewhere, is defined by the high density of technological artifacts. Now, I don't mean this in the obvious sense of such technology as transport means, civil engineering, and industrial goods. Rather, I define technology as people doing things. And in this sense, a motorized vehicle, say a car, is not that piece of engineering made of metal, of wires, of plastic, leather, and feathers, perhaps. Rather, a car becomes a car through the work different individuals invest in accomplishing the idea of a car. So what makes a car and lends it its materiality and relevance is the job to which people put it in everyday life, the attention which they accord it, the acknowledgement of the constraints which it imposes on individuals, and vice versa. The rules and regulations governing its use, with special attention being paid, not to how cars constrain individuals, but what meaning such constraints have for different individuals, as well as how these then have an impact on the nature of social relationships. So you see, the car as people doing things in accidents, traffic jams, leisurely drives, and so on. To put it differently, the idea of the car is accomplished in social situations. So my idea of a technological artifact refers to these social situations, which are people doing things. It refers to the density of meaning to be found in every single moment of interaction, which in turn yields the urban as an object of study. Now, what is fascinating about the urban in Africa is not that it is dysfunctional, like a normative view of things would have us believe. Nor that it is chaotic, hectic, and seamless. No, what is fascinating about African urban settings is how good they are at erasing the traces of their own constitution. That is, how they are able to blur the distinction between routine and creativity, so that everyday life becomes a protracted negotiation of the conditions under which things should be done or should happen. In other words, you don't take anything for granted in these settings. And yet, to be able to do anything and survive, you must take something for granted, whatever that may be. So you need to be smart. You need practical reason, a very important asset in African urban settings. Elsewhere, I described traffic in urban Africa by drawing attention to how this practical reason was deployed. I know it's not done, but I would like to quote myself. The common object in traffic is movement. Movement is the overriding moment, and it takes place even when nobody is moving. Where there is a traffic jam, movement is diverted to wild gesturing, hooting, risky maneuvers to signal to others that one wants to move. Focus on movement is expressed by the primary concern of drivers to move forward, that is, moving in order to move on. Other road users only get right of way if in that way others are able to gain some room for physically moving. A red traffic light, where there is no other vehicle in urban Africa, is not a red traffic light. And when traffic is dense, any existing traffic light ceases to exist. It is simply a nuisance. In fact, under such circumstances, local knowledge becomes particularly important. So in Maputo, for example, the capital city of my country, there is this traffic light which only locals can interpret. So those like me who have been living abroad for so many years, who did not really know that traffic light, so that the order in which the lights went up was arbitrary. Sometimes it went green after red, and sometimes it went yellow, followed by red twice. As one can easily imagine, the colors had lost their standard meaning there. Locals had their own interpretation, which I learned the hard way. So when red goes up after a quick yellow, then that red means green. And green after red twice is yellow. And when yellow shines for longer than 5 minutes, then and in between green shines, that green is not green, but red. I actually did not get it myself. And at the end of the day, I just concentrated on the behavior of others. And that is the point, actually, of practical reason. One reacts to local circumstances in ways which are close to what Herbert Simon defined as bounded rationality. So survival in urban settings in Africa requires smart individuals, people with a high level of social sophistication, people who are, unlike Walter Benjamin's flaneur and his fear of being alone, or Georg Simmel's recipient of urban stimuli that make individuals more aware of others while at the same time being less sensitive to them. African urban settings erase the distinction between observer and observed and heightened sensitivity does not translate into less feeling towards others. Rather, taking the other into account becomes the condition of possibility of life in African urban settings. These settings foster an urbane attitude to life, that is, a non-normative sophistication of manners that go from being uncouth and knowing that one is being uncouth to being polite and not giving a damn about it. Now, I said I use this notion of urbane scholarship in two related ways. First of all, urbane scholarship describes a way of being in and dealing with the world. It is how, to fall back on Nietzsche again, free spirits deal with the world. They know there is no solid ground on which to stand, or rather, what is solid about urban settings in Africa is only the assumption that everyone makes that the ground is solid. So living the city consists in working hard to sustain the illusion of certainty for the sake of coming to terms much better with the basic, pervasive, and insidious instability of the settings. Secondly, urbane scholarship describes a research field constituted by elusive objects, hiding away from our gaze and constantly resisting our grasp. In this respect, engaging with the urban is to constantly reflect on what makes it possible for us to know. And that's what African studies is mostly about. So here's my grand point today, and perhaps the point I want to convey to this conference. We don't study the urban for the sake of the urban. We study it in order to know how to study it. In other words, the challenge is a methodological one, just like with African studies in general. It is true that we study Africa with practical goals in mind. We want to contribute to the elimination of poverty, elimination of political strife, disease, and many more social ills. That is all true, but there is more to it. We study Africa because we want to know how to study Africa, and that's scholarship. Scholarship is not defined solely by the conclusions we can draw about our study objects. It is also, and perhaps more fundamentally, defined by the ability to reflect on the best way to organize our ways of knowing. It is my belief that African studies as a field gives us a privileged opportunity to do this. Time and again, we are confronted by the inadequacy of our theoretical and conceptual tools when we try to make sense of things in this most fascinating continent. African phenomena challenge us to be critical of those tools, and in so doing, to take care not to reduce what we study to what falls within the semantic fields of our concepts, but rather to go beyond them and give the improbable and the unintelligible the benefit of the doubt. Most of all, African studies implies an ethical commitment. It does not imply an ethical commitment towards the poor and the miserable of the earth, to use Frantz Fanon's words. It implies an ethical commitment towards knowledge itself, because knowledge is responsibility. Africa is not what it is because of what it is like. Africa is what it is because of what the world is like. So we study Africa to understand the world. In fact, that's our intellectual agenda here at the Center for African Studies. And we are very proud and grateful to the university for giving us room to work on this agenda. But that's a huge responsibility. And it starts with that most African of all virtues, namely acknowledging and showing respect to our ancestors. So take a deep breath. Yes, Lord Lagarde is my ancestor, however pale he may have been. If I commit myself to knowledge production, I must have the courage and sense of responsibility to accept him and his blunders and his sins, as part of the legacy that enables me to see things the way I see them today, both critically and in a celebratory manner. There's no reason why a name that elicits shame should not be used as an occasion to think about what disturbs us, what we don't want to be like, what we want to distance ourselves from. Lord Lagarde should not fall, because if he does, he may tear down most of what makes it possible for us to be critical of him. Or I might just as well silence myself, knowing full well that my silence is rendered intelligible by that which I reject. Lord Lagarde should stand so that pigeons can do all the things we would like to do to him. But most of all, so that we can stand on him, because we do stand on him, and look even taller, because great people are willing to shoulder responsibility. Unlike some of the darker sides of the Enlightenment, which are usually the target of our criticism, they often shunned responsibility, the most important of which continues to be this condescending view of Africa as a continent which is the victim of its own failures, this arrogance of severing the troubles of the continent off from the history that created them. As a scholar of African origin, I see myself as the beneficiary of moral luck. The evil things which other people did to me or to my people do not make me a better individual. What makes a better individual out of me is my willingness to take up responsibility for the decisions which I take. And I do not become a moral being, a better moral being, by asking others to do what I think is morally right. I can only forgive or refuse to forgive. It is up to the others to decide whether the pain which they inflict on others on account of their own decisions to honor their own people is worth the while. Yesterday I was talking about these issues with several friends and colleagues, two of them from Nigeria, Professors Omatayo, Oloruntuba Ojo, and Taiwo Ojo. They drew my attention to a poem by Derek Walcott, the Caribbean poet. A Far Cry from Africa, it's called, in which after a line that reads, "The violence of beast on beast is read as natural law, but upright man seeks his divinity by inflicting pain." It goes on to say, "I who am poisoned with the blood of both, where shall I turn, divided to the vein? I who have cursed the drunken officer of British rule, how choose between this Africa and the English tongue I love? Betray them both, or give back what they give? How can I face such slaughter and be cool? How can I turn from Africa and leave?" So let me end this address with a little confession. I have always been an underground critic of keynote speeches which fail to set the tone and the mood for the conference. Of course, my expectations were set so high because I never thought I would ever be asked to deliver one. Now, there is an enigmatic and for some arrogant sentence penned down by Nietzsche in a letter to another posthumous colleague, the culture and art historian Jakob Burckhardt, and I would like to share it with you in the hope of making up for whatever failure in unleashing your enthusiasm in my keynote. He was explaining his resignation from this university, and I quote him, "In the end, I would rather be a professor in Basel than being God. My problem is that I have not dared to drive my private selfishness so far as to abandon the creation of a world just for the sake of my private selfishness." Here in Basel, by the way, it is hard to be modest when you're so great. We, the African Studies community, cannot afford to let our selfishness stand in the way of a better understanding of the world. And the urban and the urbane qualities the study of Africa fosters in us can ensure that for 3 days we become urbane scholars in Basel for the sake of the world. I thank you for your attention and wish us all a great world-making conference. Thank you.
Yes, we were all anxiously waiting for this talk. And we are truly excited, I think, by it. It will stimulate a lot of discussion. There's no space for discussion after the keynotes here. We encourage you to use the social media to do so, and maybe you can choose the ECAS2017 site for that engagement, or Elysio's website. We provide space for discussion in the tent outside, which holds just 400 people. And we know, yes, there are 1,100 something people who have booked lunch. So it means you will have to take turns. You will even find a little note on the table, please don't stay too long. So like we have almost 3 hours time for lunch. Those who can go for lunch early shall go for lunch early. Those who can go late shall go late. There are many alternatives. There are book launches now, special sessions, and there is a fascinating performance coming on in front of the Kollegienhaus by Norbotic. Some of you have already seen the installation. It's a very interesting thing. Okay, and one more announcement. The book launch of Eliseo Macamo's book, Taming the Faith, published by Codestria, is coming on tomorrow already. We have this in the last program changes. If ever somebody shows up on Saturday, we will repeat it at lunchtime. But have a look at the last minute changes or the online program. You will find the information there. At the very last, some 30 people have booked special requirement lunches. Gluten allergy, dairy products, banana, raw vegetables, whatever combination you can imagine thereof. We have sorted that out. These people shall come to the conference office and collect their individual lunch bag. Thank you very much.